I've got a cursed object here, and we're going to look at what causes this, because you may run into this issue. And also, we're going to talk about what normals are and smooth shading, because these are things you're going to be using a lot to make objects. And then we're going to move on to procedural texturing. We're going to make some wood, and we're going to look at a couple of other things. So starting off with this cursed object. So this is an object which is currently flat shaded. This is just a cylinder that I added. It's got some additional geometry here. And the reason we're looking at this is because I want to talk about smooth shading and normals. So sometimes you want to create an object which is smooth. And just as an example, let's add a cylinder here. This could make, for example, like a cup or a mug. If I maybe scale down this bottom here and inset and extrude and scale this in like that, and I should turn on screencast keys so you can see what I'm doing, and right click and shade smooth. Now you can see we've got a smooth object, right? So this could be, for example, if you wanted to make a cup, you could make this, you could make a glass mug or something like this, and it would look okay. But this is where we start to run into problems sometimes, especially for beginners who are learning 3D modeling, because let's say we have an object like this cylinder, and I right click and I hit shade smooth. Now we have a disaster, right? So what is happening here? So the answer is that this is a problem with the normals of the object, and we're going to look at what this is and also what causes it. So if I go into viewport shading mode here, and just under here up in the top right, you've got this little show overlays button here, and it's got a drop down menu. And if I click this, we've got under geometry, have a checkbox here for face orientation. So if I tick that on, you can see that this is going to show us the direction that the faces that make up this object are pointing. So if you remember, objects have, there are multiple levels of geometry. We have vertexes, we have edges, we have faces, and faces actually have a front side and a back side, which is something that we haven't talked about yet. And what this is showing is everywhere in blue is the front side of a face, and everywhere in red is the back side of a face. So as a general fix to diagnose problems like this, if you have an object where you have right-clicked, so if we have a flat shaded object, you right-click and you hit shade smooth, and it comes out all like weird looking like this, a good check is just to go in here and turn on face orientation. And if you have any red faces showing on a solid object, just tab into edit mode, A to select all, and then Shift N to essentially force all of the faces to be outward facing. Now, why does this happen? Like, why does this happen when you're building an object? Sometimes you end up with a face that is that's pointing the wrong way. So I can show you if we go here and we hit Shift A mesh plane, and you should do this yourself as well to follow along, and click on this plane here. You can see it's got a front face and a back face, and if I tab into edit mode and I select it and I extrude it, it's going to want to extrude this way, and you can see we have no issues. However, let's Control Z to undo that. If I select this face and I extrude downwards now, it's going to be extruding that back face. So if I extrude in this direction, you can see now, we've got a red cube. And so all of the normals for this cube are pointing towards the inside, and so this object's not gonna work properly. And it can cause shading issues, it can cause issues with your materials, and so this is something that you want to avoid. So again, tab into edit mode, A to select the whole thing, and Shift N to point the normals back in the direction that they're supposed to be pointing. So that's a quick intro to face orientation and normals. Now we're going to get into the stuff that most intro videos generally gloss over, which is really important in order to properly understand 3D models. So I'm going to hit Shift A mesh circle and add 6 verts and tab into edit mode and F to make this a hexagon, and then tab into edit mode again and extrude, and now we've got this hexagon, hexagonal prism. It's not really, but. So what I want to show you here is the difference between face normals, vertex normals, and normal averaging, and how that works with smooth shading. I have a whole video just on normals. I'm going to leave a link to that in the description. We're going to talk about normal maps in sort of a different video, but if you want sort of a deep dive into what normal maps are and how normals work, that's a good video for you to watch. All right, so we have this object here, and I'm just going to turn off face orientation, and I want to show you so we're not in edit mode, we're in object mode right now. And if I go here up in the top under overlays, you can see we have face orientation. But if you tab into edit mode, then we get some more detailed normal view modes. So if you go down here at the bottom of this menu while in edit mode, you'll see we've got one called normals, and we have display face normals, we have display split normals, and then we also have display vertex normals. So let's turn on face normals and vertex normals and turn the size up so we can see what's going on here. So the face normals are what corresponds to the face direction. So when we had this face orientation on, if for example I flip one of these inside out and go back into edit mode, you can see that that line is now pointing towards the inside of the object. So every normal, or every face rather, has a normal pointing out from its front face, and that is the face normal. So in this case, when a face is reversed, that face normal is pointing inwards, which we don't want. So we're gonna Shift N, and you can see now it's pointing back outwards. And if we go back here to our object mode, you can see that the face orientation is correct. So these are different view modes showing essentially the same thing. So this face orientation, when it's blue, is indicating that the face normal is pointing towards you. When it's red, it's pointing the opposite direction. Next we have split normals, and this essentially is what dictates how smooth shading works. So I mentioned that we can create smooth objects by clicking on an object, right-clicking and hitting Shade Smooth. And you can see now that we've got this object and it looks smooth, but it's not. If we tab into edit mode, this is still the same geometry. And so, like, what the heck is going on here? And what's happening is that in 3D modeling, smooth shading actually does sort of a trick where you can have smooth shading applied to an object that's not actually smooth in terms of its geometry, and in this way we can get away with having much lower poly objects that appear smooth even though they're not really. So the way that this works is if we go hit 7 to go into top view and we look at our object, you can see we have our face normals, and I'm just going to grab this pen tool. So our face normals point out perpendicular to each face, and then we have a vertex normal coming out of each vertex that's going this way. And if I right click the object and I shade flat and then tab into edit mode, you'll notice that we now actually have two. And so what's happening here is when we have flat shading on, faces are rendered per pixel, with each pixel normal perpendicular to the face normal. And so what ends up happening is here we have edges that are completely shaded as though they're perpendicular to one another, and therefore we get the appearance of a hard seam between those two faces. Let's turn on smooth shading and see what happens to our vertex normals. So right click the object in object mode and shade smooth. So now we have this smooth object, and if I hit tab, you can see that now we've only got one of these. And what's happening is, so for each pixel that gets rendered on your monitor are being averaged across adjacent faces. So where we have this one and this one, which are pointing different directions, now the normals across this edge here are appearing to be round because all of the interpolated normals between this face between this face normal and this face normal are being averaged. And so what we're seeing here with this vertex normal is that this is essentially representing the average between those two. So this is no longer appearing to be split in two different directions, because what's happening now is that these, I didn't do a very good job of drawing that, but these are now being averaged between here and here, so that it gives sort of a round appearance to the object. Now here's why you should care about that and why it's important for 3D modeling. You'll often see smooth shaded models, and I see them all the time in like games and in like stuff that's been posted online that look like this, where you have this smooth shading, but it looks kind of weird, right? It doesn't look how we would expect a cylinder to look. And the reason is that we have a large sort of gap in geometry here where, remember, with smooth shading turned on, adjacent faces are going to be averaged. So this face normal here is being averaged with this one around this edge. And that's why we have this weird effect where it looks like the object is sort of smooth all the way around, right? And what we actually would like, in order for this to look like a cylinder, even though it's only got, it's essentially hexagon on the top and bottom face, what we would like in order to get like a nice rounded edge is for it to just be rounded here, right? Not from here all the way to here. So how do we fix this? There are a couple of ways of doing this. One of them is to add more geometry around the areas that we want to sort of have a smoother or a shorter transition. So if, for example, we want this edge just to be rounded from here to here, we could add a loop cut here so that we have a face normal here, but then the face normal that's going to be averaged with the top is the adjacent one. So we've got a face normal here now and a face normal here, so that this averaging is occurring here rather than all the way around the object like that. So let's do that and see what that looks like. So I'm going to tab into edit mode on this object and hit Control R to add a normal, or to add a loop cut, and I'm just going to drag this up to the top. And now you can see that we've got an edge here. It doesn't look completely smooth anymore, or all the way around. We've actually got a clear definition between this top face and these side faces. And that's because if we tab into edit mode now, you can see, because we added that loop cut here, let me go into face mode here, you can see that this is a face. We have an extra loop of faces around the top. And as a result, those interpolated normals are being averaged from here to here. And that's reflected here in this split normal, right? So we've got a face normal that's much closer to the edge than we did before. Now, that doesn't come at no cost, because of course, now we have more geometry in our mesh, right? So if we were to subdivide this, we could end up with very dense topology around that top edge here. We haven't talked much about topology yet. We will at some point. I have another video on topology on my channel if you wanted sort of a deep dive just into that. But it's just a good thing for you to know that you are adding more vertices to your mesh by doing this. All right, so now that we've learned how to do this stuff, now that we know what normals are, let's go ahead and make a smooth object. So I'm actually going to delete everything, delete all those objects in the scene. Let's even delete the point light, because I think let's add a different light. But let's make like a bowl or something that should be smooth. So Shift A, mesh circle, and verts, let's do like 24 verts, something like that. So it's, and just in vertex mode, you can see it's got a number of verts, but nothing too crazy. And F to fill that in. Let's actually go ahead and turn off these normals, because that's not something we need to visualize constantly. And let's go ahead and extrude and scale and extrude and scale, extrude and scale, and extrude again and scale. And let's actually tab into edit mode and just with this top face selected, so you can alt click this edge And at X, we're going to delete faces only. There we go. And so now this is our bowl, but obviously this doesn't have any thickness. So let's go ahead and add, actually it's a little bit dark, so let's go back into viewport shading mode here. We're going to add a modifier, and we haven't talked about too much about modifiers yet either, but we'll do that at some point. We're going to have a video just on modifiers. But for now, let's go ahead and add a solidify modifier, which is one that you'll use quite a bit. So it's down here under generate near the bottom. We have solidify, and it has a couple of parameters. Thickness is exactly what it sounds like. It's how thick the object is. And I'm going to extrude it inwards like this amount maybe. I'm just eyeballing it. This is, we didn't resize this, so this is not to real world scale. It is huge. And I'm going to hit apply. And now we have a bowl and it has some thickness. So what I'm going to do is right click and shade smooth. Right, and you'll notice, let me turn off this face orientation, that we've got that thing I talked about earlier, right, where we've got this sort of weird stretching, not stretching, but like averaging of normals around, and so the object looks smooth in ways that it shouldn't. And so what we're going to do to fix that, again, is we're going to Control R and add a loop cut to shorten that rounding over of edges. And this is essentially like a proximity loop. It's if you wanted to subdivide a mesh, you would do the same thing. So let's add this proximity loop here, and I'm just going to drag it up here and Control R on the inside. And now you can see we have a much cleaner looking rim, right? Let's do the same thing down here. Control R, bring this in, and for these as well. And now you can see we've got much neater looking shading around those areas. And then for this bottom here, one of the ways that you can get rid of weird shading on n-gons, and this right here is an n-gon because it has more than 4 verts. It's not a quad. It's not a tri. It is a 5 or more essentially vert face. One of the ways that you can get rid of n-gons is to just hit I to extrude, and I've seen people do this where like they just extrude inwards and make this point very small in the middle, and that can get rid of issues with smooth shading by hiding them essentially. So that is one approach, but sometimes on like a sphere or something you'll get weird stretching because you haven't actually gotten rid of that n-gon. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm just going to Control Z to undo that. With this face here on the bottom, I'm going to hit I to inset, X to delete the face, and then I'm going to alt click and select this rim here, this edge here, and I'm going to search for grid fill. And if you don't like using this search bar here, by the way, it's under face, grid fill right here. And so now we have a quad-based face here on the bottom. We don't have any more n-gons in our mesh. So let's finish this up by doing the same thing up here. Add a loop cut here to tighten up that shading. And inset this. And then again, this is probably fine because it's a flat surface. If it's not a planar surface though, then you'll get some weird shading effects. So I'm going to delete it and grid fill. There we go. So there is our bowl. Let's give it a material. We're going to call that material bowl, and just turn the roughness down and give it like a, I don't know, a blue color, and then let's add a light, a point light. Oh, I said we were going to make a sun, so let's do that. Shift A, light, sun, and just G to drag it up. And then this, if you haven't made a sun before as an object, it's got this little handle here. Just click that and drag it, and that sort of controls the direction that the sun is pointing. So we'll point it this way, and then 7 to go into top view, and maybe just angle it like this a little bit, so we've got some of that shading sort of coming from the side. And then I'm actually going to just set to make my ball a little taller. So here we go. It's a pretty dumb looking bowl, but it drives home the point about doing smooth shading. And if we wanted to, you could go in here to the modifier properties and add a subdivision surface modifier, and can just leave this as it is, and that will work properly because we have grid filled those n-gons. So you need to have a quad base mesh in order to subdivide. And there we go. I added an HDRI as well, so we can get sort of a better look. But here's our bowl. Doesn't look terrible and looks properly smoothed. So that's it for this video. And in the next one, we're going to talk a little bit more about materials. We're going to learn about procedural materials and then get on to sort of baking materials.